My sister-in-law cried at Thanksgiving dinner, one hand pressed to her stomach, and announced she was having complications that meant she might lose the baby unless she could afford a specialist our insurance wouldn't cover. By the following week, our family had collectively raised almost $11,000 for her medical expenses. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. And I was the one who eventually discovered, almost by accident, that an entire 8-month pregnancy our family had celebrated, worried over, and financially supported had been completely fabricated from the very beginning. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my brother's wife orchestrated one of the most elaborate, sustained deceptions I've ever personally witnessed, and the specific, disorienting process of being the person who ultimately unraveled it, while watching my entire family struggle to accept what I'd found. I want to explain what my relationship with my sister-in-law, Vanessa, looked like before this happened, because I think understanding that context matters to fully grasping how something this elaborate could unfold within a family that genuinely cared about her. Vanessa married my older brother, Sean, roughly 3 years before this entire situation began. And while our relationship had never been especially close, it had always been perfectly cordial, the kind of relationship many sisters-in-law maintain, without any particular depth or tension. Vanessa announced her pregnancy at a family barbecue roughly 9 months before that devastating Thanksgiving revelation, an announcement that produced genuine, uncomplicated joy throughout our entire family. My parents had been eager for grandchildren for years, my brother's marriage having faced some earlier fertility struggles that Vanessa had discussed, at various points, with genuine apparent emotional weight, making this pregnancy announcement feel like a particularly meaningful, hard-won milestone for both of them. I remember that specific barbecue vividly. Vanessa waiting until we'd all gathered around the picnic table, handing my mother a small gift bag containing a onesie that read, "Grandma's favorite." Watching my mother's face light up with genuine, overwhelming joy as she understood what the gift meant. I remember Sean standing beside Vanessa, his arm around her, looking genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy in a way I hadn't seen from him in years, understanding now how completely that happiness had been built on a foundation neither of them could have known, at that exact moment, would eventually collapse. I want to describe the early months of this pregnancy, because the specific, sustained detail Vanessa maintained throughout this period matters considerably to understanding how thoroughly convincing the entire fabrication actually was. She shared regular updates about morning sickness, about specific doctor's appointments, about the gradual physical changes any genuine pregnancy involves. She began wearing what appeared to be maternity clothing around month 3, and by month 5, had developed what looked, to my entire family's collective observation, like a genuinely growing pregnant belly. I want to be direct about something that, in hindsight, should have raised more immediate questions than it did at the time. None of us, throughout this entire 8-month period, ever actually attended a doctor's appointment with Vanessa or saw any direct medical documentation beyond her own verbal reports and occasional photographs of ultrasound images she'd share during family gatherings. This absence of direct verification felt, at the time, like ordinary respect for medical privacy rather than anything suspicious, the kind of boundary most families naturally maintain around another person's pregnancy-related medical care. I want to describe the specific financial requests that began emerging around the 5th month of this supposed pregnancy, requests that, individually, seemed reasonable enough given the genuine financial pressures many pregnant couples face, but that, in retrospect, formed an escalating pattern I didn't fully recognize as concerning until considerably later. The first request involved help covering costs for what Vanessa described as a specialized prenatal vitamin regimen her doctor had recommended given some early complications, a request my mother happily fulfilled, sending several $100s without any hesitation. This was followed, over the subsequent months, by additional requests. Help with costs for a specific type of maternity support garment Vanessa claimed her doctor had recommended for a diagnosed condition affecting her pregnancy. Contribution toward a baby moon trip she and Sean were planning before the baby's arrival. And, most significantly, that devastating Thanksgiving announcement about a specialist consultation not covered by their insurance. I want to describe that Thanksgiving dinner directly, because it remains one of the more emotionally manipulative moments I've personally witnessed, understanding now everything I eventually learned about its actual purpose. Vanessa waited until we were all gathered around the table, dessert already served, when she set down her fork and, with visible, apparently genuine distress, announced that her most recent appointment had revealed a concerning complication, something involving placental positioning that her doctor wanted a specialist to evaluate immediately. A specialist whose consultation fee our family's insurance wouldn't cover given some complicated pre-authorization issue she described in enough specific. plausible-sounding medical language that none of us thought to question the underlying details. I want to describe watching my entire family's response to this announcement. My mother immediately offering to help cover whatever costs were necessary. My father pulling out his phone to transfer money before we'd even finished dessert. My own genuine, uncomplicated concern for both Vanessa and the pregnancy I fully believed, at that point, to be completely real and increasingly at risk. Our family collectively raised just over $11,000 over the following 2 weeks. Contributions from my parents, from Sean's own savings, from myself and my husband, and from several extended family members Vanessa had also reached out to directly. All of us genuinely believing we were supporting a beloved family member navigating a frightening pregnancy complication. I want to describe the specific circumstances that eventually led me to discover the truth, because the actual unraveling happened almost accidentally, through a completely unrelated situation rather than any deliberate investigation on my part. Roughly 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving fundraising effort, I needed to pick up a prescription at a pharmacy located near Vanessa and Sean's neighborhood. A pharmacy I didn't normally use, but that happened to be convenient given an appointment I'd had nearby that day. While waiting for my prescription, I ran into a woman I vaguely recognized from a previous family gathering, a coworker of Vanessa's whom I'd met briefly at a birthday party months earlier. We struck up a friendly, casual conversation while waiting, and at some point, she asked, with what seemed like genuine warmth, how Vanessa's pregnancy was progressing, mentioning she hadn't seen her at work in a while and hoped everything was going smoothly. I want to describe the specific, small detail that first introduced a flicker of confusion during this conversation. When I mentioned the recent placental complication and the specialist consultation, the coworker's face shifted into visible confusion. "Wait, I didn't realize she was still pregnant," she said. "I thought she told everyone at work months ago that she'd had a miscarriage, back around when she stopped coming in regularly." I remember standing in that pharmacy waiting area, my prescription bag still in my hand, feeling the specific, disorienting sensation of the floor seeming to shift slightly beneath me. I asked the coworker to clarify what she meant, keeping my voice as casual as I could manage despite the sudden, urgent need to understand exactly what she was describing. She explained that Vanessa had, according to what she remembered, mentioned a miscarriage to a few close coworkers roughly 2 months into the pregnancy. Information that had apparently circulated quietly through her workplace before Vanessa stopped coming in regularly not long after. I want to try to describe the specific, disorienting confusion of that statement, standing in a pharmacy waiting area, trying to reconcile this casual comment against 8 months of consistent, detailed pregnancy updates I'd received directly from Vanessa throughout our family gatherings. I didn't immediately assume the worst. My initial thought was that perhaps there had been some kind of miscommunication at Vanessa's workplace, or that she'd told a simplified, private version of events to her coworkers for reasons unrelated to any actual deception toward our family. But the specific detail continued nagging at me over the following days, prompting me, somewhat reluctantly, to do something I'd never previously considered: quietly, carefully verify some of the specific details Vanessa had shared with our family throughout this pregnancy. I want to describe the following 2 weeks, an increasingly uncomfortable process of gentle, indirect investigation that I approached with genuine reluctance, understanding how significant an accusation of this magnitude would be if it turned out I was simply misunderstanding an innocent situation, but unable to fully dismiss the growing unease this pharmacy conversation had introduced. I reached out, carefully and indirectly, to a mutual friend who worked at the same hospital system Vanessa had claimed to be receiving her prenatal care from, asking, under the pretense of simply wanting to understand more about the specific specialist consultation process for a friend navigating something similar, whether she could help me understand typical timelines and procedures for exactly the kind of placental complication Vanessa had described. This friend, a labor and delivery nurse with genuine expertise in exactly this area, explained, without any particular suspicion of what I was actually investigating, that the specific complication Vanessa had described, combined with the timeline and symptoms she'd reported throughout the pregnancy, contained several medically implausible inconsistencies that a genuine treating physician would likely have caught and addressed differently than what Vanessa had described experiencing. I want to describe the specific, sickening progression of doubt that developed throughout these 2 weeks, moving from a single confusing comment at a pharmacy toward an increasingly concerning pattern of inconsistencies that I found myself unable to simply dismiss as innocent miscommunication. I want to describe the specific moment I finally decided I needed to directly, carefully investigate whether Vanessa was actually pregnant at all, a decision I reached with genuine internal conflict, understanding both the significance of what I might discover and the potentially devastating impact on my relationship with both Vanessa and my brother if I was wrong about my growing suspicions. I want to describe the specific, uncomfortable conversation I eventually had with Sean directly, roughly 3 weeks after that initial pharmacy encounter, approaching him privately, away from Vanessa, to share my concerns as gently as I could manage while still being honest about the specific inconsistencies I discovered. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think carefully before you answer, I told him during this difficult conversation. Have you personally been to any of Vanessa's doctor's appointments? Have you seen any actual medical documentation about this pregnancy beyond what she's told you and shown you? I want to describe watching my brother's face during this question, watching him move through what appeared to be genuine confusion, followed by a slower, more troubled recognition that he actually couldn't provide a confident, definitive answer. She's always gone to her appointments alone, he said, his voice carrying a growing uncertainty. She said she preferred it that way, that having me there made her more anxious. I've seen ultrasound photos. I've felt her stomach. Rachel, what are you actually asking me right now? I want to describe the following days. Sean beginning his own careful, increasingly urgent investigation into the actual reality of his wife's pregnancy, a process that ultimately revealed, with devastating clarity, that Vanessa had never actually been pregnant at all. Throughout the entire 8-month period our family had celebrated, worried over, and financially supported what turned out to be an elaborate, sustained fabrication. I want to describe the specific mechanics of how Vanessa had apparently constructed this deception, information that emerged gradually over the following weeks through a combination of Sean's own investigation and, eventually, Vanessa's own partial confession once confronted with undeniable evidence. She had used a combination of prosthetic pregnancy belly padding, available through various specialty retailers, progressively adjusted throughout the months to simulate the gradual growth a genuine pregnancy would show, along with fabricated or, in some cases, entirely appropriated ultrasound images she'd apparently found through online searches and presented as her own. I want to try to describe the specific, sickening scope of this discovery, understanding that Vanessa had maintained this elaborate physical deception, requiring daily, ongoing maintenance of the prosthetic padding and consistent physical performance of pregnancy symptoms throughout an entire 8-month period, all while simultaneously soliciting increasingly significant financial support from our family based on fabricated medical complications that had never actually existed. I want to describe the specific, devastating confrontation between Sean and Vanessa once his own investigation had confirmed what I'd initially suspected, a conversation I wasn't directly present for, but that Sean later described to me in painful, exhausting detail. Vanessa's eventual explanation, when she could no longer sustain the deception given the undeniable evidence Sean had gathered, revealed a considerably more complicated situation than simple financial fraud, though this additional context, while providing some understanding, never fully justified the specific, sustained scope of what she'd actually done to our entire family. She explained that she had, in fact, been pregnant at the beginning of this timeline, a pregnancy that had ended in an early miscarriage roughly 6 weeks after her initial announcement to our family, an experience she described as genuinely devastating, compounded by a specific, complicated fear about how our family, and particularly Sean, would react to learning about this loss after such excited, public celebration. I couldn't handle everyone's disappointment, she told Sean, during their devastating conversation. Everyone was so happy. Your parents were already planning nursery colors, and I just couldn't face telling everyone it was already over. I told myself I'd figure out how to tell everyone eventually, and then more time passed, and it just felt impossible to go back and undo everything I'd already let everyone believe. I want to describe the specific, layered complexity of processing this explanation, understanding that Vanessa's initial impulse toward concealment, however misguided, emerged from a genuine, devastating loss and a specific, human fear about disappointing a family she cared about. This context, while genuinely significant, never adequately explained the subsequent months of increasingly elaborate deception, including the physical prosthetic maintenance, the fabricated medical complications, and, most significantly, the deliberate financial solicitation based on medical crises that had never actually existed. I want to describe the specific, devastating question this entire situation raised regarding the financial contributions our family had made throughout this 8-month period. Understanding that the $11,000 raised during that Thanksgiving fundraising effort, along with the various smaller contributions throughout the preceding months, had all been solicited based on a pregnancy that, by that point, had never actually existed beyond its brief, genuine beginning and subsequent concealed loss. I want to describe the extended family conversation that eventually took place. Roughly 2 weeks after this entire truth came to light, involving my parents, Sean, and myself, working through both the practical question of the financial contributions and the much deeper, more painful question of how to process this level of sustained deception from someone who had, for 3 years prior to this situation, been a genuinely welcome member of our family. My mother, in particular, struggled significantly with this discovery, understanding that her own generous, loving response to what she believed was a genuine, frightening pregnancy complication had actually been deliberately manipulated and exploited over an extended period. "I keep thinking about how worried I was," she told me, during one particularly difficult conversation. "I lost sleep thinking about her and that baby. And there was never actually a baby to worry about, not for most of that time. I don't know how to process that kind of betrayal from someone I genuinely loved as a daughter." I want to describe Sean's own difficult, ongoing process of determining how to move forward with his marriage in the aftermath of this devastating discovery, understanding that beyond the specific financial deception affecting our extended family, this situation raised profound questions about the fundamental honesty underlying his entire marriage to Vanessa. Sean and Vanessa ultimately separated roughly 2 months after this entire situation came to light, a decision Sean reached after extensive individual therapy and considerable reflection regarding whether he could genuinely rebuild trust with someone capable of sustaining a deception this elaborate and consequential for this long a period. I want to describe the specific, difficult process our family underwent regarding the financial contributions that had been made throughout this fabricated pregnancy, ultimately deciding, after extensive discussion, not to pursue formal legal action to recover the funds, understanding both the genuine complexity of Vanessa's underlying grief and loss, and the practical reality that pursuing legal action would likely prove both expensive and only partially successful, given Vanessa's own limited financial resources. I want to be honest about my own complicated, ongoing feelings regarding my specific role in ultimately discovering this deception, understanding that while I believe uncovering the truth was genuinely necessary and important, I also carry some difficult, persistent guilt about having been the specific family member who initiated the investigation that ultimately ended my brother's marriage and fundamentally altered our extended family's relationship with someone we genuinely welcomed and loved for years. I want to describe the specific, ongoing complexity of my relationship with Vanessa in the aftermath of this entire situation, understanding that we haven't maintained any direct contact since everything came to light, though I occasionally receive secondhand updates through mutual acquaintances. Learning that she's apparently begun her own individual therapy specifically addressing what her new therapist has characterized, according to what Sean has shared with our family, as a complicated grief response that spiraled into increasingly elaborate deception rather than being processed through healthier, more honest channels. I want to describe how this experience has changed my own approach to supporting family members through significant life events, understanding, in a way I genuinely didn't before this experience, how completely a sustained, elaborate deception can be constructed and maintained even within a family built on genuine, long-standing trust and care. It's been just over 16 months since that pharmacy encounter that first introduced doubt into what I'd believed, until that point, was a completely genuine, if increasingly concerning, pregnancy. Sean has slowly rebuilt his own life following the divorce, and our extended family has, gradually, processed both the practical and emotional weight of this entire situation, understanding that we'll likely never fully resolve every complicated feeling this experience introduced. I think often about the specific, devastating irony embedded in how this entire deception unfolded. That Vanessa's genuine grief regarding an actual, real pregnancy loss ultimately transformed, through a series of increasingly desperate decisions, into a sustained fabrication that caused far more lasting damage to our family than the original, honest loss itself would have caused, had she found the courage to share that painful truth with us when it actually happened. If you've ever discovered that a family member had sustained an elaborate deception regarding a medical crisis or significant life event, exploiting your family's genuine care and financial generosity over an extended period, I want to hear how you navigated both the practical and emotional complexity of processing that particular betrayal. I used to believe that a family's collective, generous response to a loved one's medical crisis represented an uncomplicated, straightforward expression of genuine care that couldn't possibly be exploited or manipulated by someone we'd welcomed as genuine family. I've learned, in the most disorienting way possible, that even the most genuine family bonds can become vulnerable to sustained, elaborate deception when someone within that family is navigating their own private grief or fear in ways that spiral toward increasingly desperate, dishonest choices rather than the vulnerable honesty that difficult moments actually require.